Our keynote speaker is Mr. Folashodun Shonubi. He holds a double master's degree in business administration and mechanical engineering from the University of Lagos. He is a resourceful banker with over 30 years of professional experience. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Governor in the Central Bank of Nigeria, he was the Managing Director and CEO in the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, PLC, from 2012 to 2018. His paper is titled Accelerating Digital Transformation, Need for Regulatory Perspective.
Thank you. I hope it's not another rerun. Oh, okay. Good morning, and thank you very much for having me in this morning. And as you can see, some of us need to wake up with a dash of coffee. So I hope you all have your coffee and you're wide awake. At least I am. I have a small presentation which should come up now. If somebody can please put it up. And because I am not techie savvy, and I also like to push the blame to people if things go wrong, someone at that end would please move the slides forward when I say next slide. So can we please have the presentation up? And I'll be talking about transformation, and then we'll tag digital to it so that we understand the basics. My role is to share thoughts that you can build on rather than give you answers that are particular to me and my experiences. I think the challenge we tend to have many times is that people expect the central banks, but definitely myself, to have answers to the problems of everybody. And so when it doesn't work, we're the target. But I've learned through life that nobody has the answers. You have the answers because you're unique. We're waiting for the presentation to come up. But while they're putting it up, I'll just start with the basics, which are the first few slides, and everybody knows. So when we talk about digital transformation, what is digital transformation? Has many interpretations, many ways people present it. But I think top on the list is the one we have in Wikipedia that says digital transformation is the integration of digital technology into all areas of a business. Emphasis on all areas of a business, integration of digital technology. Fundamentally changing how the business operates and delivering value to customers. Again, emphasis on changing how it operates and, more important, the customer value proposition. And then finally, it goes on to say it has a cultural change that requires organizations to continuously challenge the status quo, experiment, and get comfortable with failure. The last part is one of the biggest challenges that we see, because the highly competitive environments that we operate these days do not encourage us to fail. And that's a very big pity. My presentation is not interesting without the slides. Thank you. So no, that picture is not part of my presentation. No. I was younger in those days. I hadn't joined the central bank. Thank you. So next slide, please. So when we talk about digital transformation, next slide, please. Thank you. When we talk about digital transformation, it's made up of two parts: digital, which is information, and change. Change is the transformation part of it. And it's not new. The truth is that we've had transformations using information over the years, business process reengineering, TQM, but the quantum of data that was used was limited, and the way it was handled and the insights drawn from it even less understood. but change has always been there and is not new. So when people start hyping digital transformation as the in thing, the way, it's just picking up what has been and bringing it up to speed with what we have available as tools. So there are generally four, sometimes people say five or three types of digital transformation. There's the business process, which is the how we do things. And that's one of the more common ones. Then you have the business model, which is what do we do? Not just how, but what do we do? Do we make cars? And then you have the domain, which is a more profound change, which asks, who are we? In those days, we used to call it diversification. But who are we? We're into some line of business, which we've looked at under the business model transformation. And we have some other things coming up. We'll go into them in a bit more detail. And the last is the cultural and the organizational, by far the most important, which is about whom we are, the people. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we start talking about process transformation, what comes to mind most times is we have a lot of information, data. We apply analytics on it. It tells us how many people come in at a certain time, how things move around, and we get beautiful insights from it and new ways to look at things. And our goal is to lower costs, reduce processing cycles, increase quality, and generally make the customer happy. This is the most common one. This is what 90% of the people are doing when they talk about digital transformation. And they're bringing technology, information technology into it, getting various parts to talk to themselves to make it more efficient. This is the norm. Next slide. Then you have the business model, which is what do we do as a business and how can we elevate it to the next level? It is looking at and expanding how things are done and usually creating in that way a whole new angle to the industry. Same industry, but a different way of looking at it. So it focuses on the business as a whole, whereas process transformation is looking at specific areas, which we call the finite areas of the business. The business model is aimed at the fundamentals, the building blocks of that business. And the examples, which everybody knows, is Apple. I remember when Apple started, almost everybody thought it was a crazy idea that why would anybody want to buy music that they haven't seen on media that they don't have, that's in the air. Before then, we had the compact disc coming out from Philips, which was supposed to change the world and be there forever. And Apple changed that whole notion. Sign up with me. And then what do you have? You have access to music anytime, anywhere, any way you want it, and it's cheaper. So they fundamentally changed the industry for music. But I think one other thing which they fundamentally changed that people don't appreciate is that they changed the idea and the notion of stored value. Because when we all started putting money into our iTunes accounts and we were using them to buy music and to buy books, we never saw it as being part of the payment system or being part of a larger commercial transaction system. We saw it more of, I have someone, they are called Apple, they sell music and books, I can buy from them. But fundamentally, they made us very comfortable with the idea and with the notion of using regular stored value with big merchants to pay for things. And of course, you have Uber and you have a whole range of others, Netflix included. So if we go to the one that's less understood, which is the domain transformation, which in those days we used to call, what's the word we use now? Diversification. But in the context of technology now, it's being able to see opportunities that are not within the industry where we are, but where we can take advantage of the skill sets or skill that we have created. Very difficult to do. You need to have a lot of resources because you're going into a new area that you're either creating or you're going into a new market that already has participants in it. So usually scale is of the essence, and chances of success are low, but the rewards that come from it are pretty high. And as an example we've given here is Amazon is now accepted as being in the technology space for providing cloud computing infrastructure. And if you look at their accounts, a significant part of their revenues is now coming from that. If you ask what Amazon was known for, it was running online retail and moving goods from and around different places. Not exactly what you'd consider as technology, but they realized that the skill set that they had grown, plus the infrastructure they had put in place to ensure they were able to deliver, meant the skill created and the knowledge would allow them go into another business and be successful there. So that for me is another example. Trying to think locally, I'm thinking of USC Foods, because we all knew USC initially and nobody knew them for foods when they started. And then you also have the issue of USC and Mr. Big. So which one is domain transformation? Which one is business model transformation? I would consider them going into food, learning from the things that were moving around as more of a domain transformation. But being into food, making gala, realizing that there were opportunities to sell to customers and people they were interacting with, meant that they had looked at the business, which was now food, and decided to move into Mr. Biggs, which was the fast food side of the business. They started with the fastest food side of the business, selling gala on the road, and then they moved to fast food, which was business model. So domain, not very common, not very well understood, but highly profitable if we get it right. And then the last, which is the organization and culture. Next slide, please. This is the problem one. Anything that has to do with people, human beings, is a problem. Not that it's not worth doing, but it's very hard because we all have our views, we have ideas, and you need to manage all of them. It's particularly difficult when you're trying to manage change in an organization where you have people with different skill sets and understanding. And once you talk technology, they feel you are favoring the young who speak the lingo. Unfortunately, the decision makers and people with influence, not necessarily level, but influence, haven't been in the organization, haven't interacted with decision makers, tend to be, would I say, the older or less techie savvy people. And so you can't do transformation without finding a way to bring them up and in, without deciding to define a system that makes it easier to implement all those changes as they are. It includes the hierarchy being flattened, which means some people will lose their power, they lose their influence, but allows the organization, for it to move on with the change that's required, needs to get the ecosystem changed. So this is the hardest part, and you find out that many organizations fail. Next slide, please. Because we miss out on the people side. So what is it that we can learn from? What has helped organizations to succeed in digital transformation? Next slide, please. There are five of them. So the first is figuring out our business strategy, and we're still going to talk about each of these five in a bit more later and apply it to our situation. But we need to know what it is we want to do. Too many times it's a question of everybody says this is what's going on. The competitor has implemented or installed this kind of system. So we're walking to an answer. We have a tool and we say go and implement it. or we have a process that is being done somewhere else and we say, go and change. It does not fit into this strategy. We don't even know what the strategy is many times, but we want to make a fundamental change. So if we can't figure out a business strategy, we haven't even started. Second is that we need to use people who understand. Digital transformation is about information. And while there's a lot of information that's captured statistically, that's recorded, that's stored, within the organization, there's even more information that's not documented. It's not the how things are done, but many times the why. And so when we bring outsiders, the consultants in, you see the how, but you miss out on the why. And so missing out on the why and not getting people inside involved means half the time they are scared and they may actually work to make it fail. Next slide. If we're talking about customer, you remember the definition of digital transformation. It says all the things we're doing is for the good of the customer. Then the question we should be asking ourselves is, what does the customer want? Again, we don't ask that question, especially in the financial industry. If I pose a question to most of you around financial inclusion and say, what does financial inclusion mean? The standard response you get is financial inclusion means providing access to people so that they can have financial services. Okay, what does that mean? Providing digital payments for them, providing credit, providing insurance, providing a whole range of financial services and products to people that are underserved. So I asked the question, what do you mean by people that are underserved? Now, the average person either has economic power or he doesn't have economic power. If he doesn't have economic power, he's not being served anyway. So there's no need to talk about underserved. So we're talking about somebody who already has economic power and influence. They're doing these things now. They're getting loans from themselves with conditions that you couldn't match. They're making payments to themselves in ways you cannot achieve, because fundamentally, for many of them, and I'll use the example of a woman who sells sweets in front of the school. Her scale is small, and therefore the stock she can carry is small, and the ability to convert the stock to cash back to stock, the cycle time is important to them. So I'm in front of a school, they come out, they buy sweets from me. During break time, good. The day that they have sports day, a lot more people, my capital doesn't increase, but my turnaround has to increase. So I sell the sweets, I take the cash, I run, buy a box or 2 boxes of sweets, I come back and I sell them again. Now, when you go and talk to that person and you're talking about financial inclusion, people are talking to her about, let's give you POS, let's give you an app, let's give you USSD. And the question asked, is that what the customer wants? Or is that what we want? So we need to be very, very careful in understanding like it's all for the customer. Transformation does not impact the customer, is a waste of time and money. So let's think it through. And then we have, of course, like I've already highlighted, the fear that it might affect me. And lastly, the flat structure. So these are some of the key things that would make our transformation successful. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Gartner in 2018 sent out questionnaires to CIOs on digital transformation. And as you would expect, everybody is doing digital transformation, or at least 2/3 of them. But when you start asking what they are doing, it turns out only 10% are really doing what can be called transformation in the true sense. Many of them are just doing business process re-engineering. So rather than giving you a calculator, I give you an Excel sheet. And I've made a difference. It's not really transformation in the sense. So let's not get carried away with the rhetoric. That's the point I'm trying to make. We are either doing it properly or there's no point doing it. And that's why majority of such projects tend to fail. Majority tend to fail. So let's look at, next slide, what is commonly known, basic examples. I'm not going to waste too much time on it. Moving from print to digital. I picked marketing because it's one of the first areas and what we all tend to know and see what digital transformation has done. And all of them, from social media advertising to apps, we know all about this. So can we go to the next slide? You also have things that have been done. Tesla, and I love what they did. Whereas everybody would say, I spent so much money on coming up with a new idea, a new concept, and a new product, and therefore I would license it the Apple way. They gave it all out. But they were very clear in their strategy. They wanted to make their technology standard. They knew the big boys were out there. They hadn't jumped into the electric vehicle business. They were the startup, but they needed to ensure their own system became the standard. So they gave it out for free. And Tesla is more or less the standard for now. But the second one is what I even enjoyed more. That's between Philips and Schiphol Airport, where rather than the norm, I put the light fittings, I put the bulbs in, I supply you power. They said, no, don't worry. Pay for the light that is used. So if you turn off the light, you won't pay anything. We'll put the bulbs in, we'll ensure there's electricity, pay for use, pay per use. And if you analyze that concept of pay per use, you begin to realize that there are many things that are going to go down that route. Very many things that over time will be pay per use. And I'm wondering if banking may not become one of them. You might say indirectly we're doing pay per use for when you look at your account charges, because it's charged on activity on the account. But the reality is that the amount of money I move out is not the use, really. It costs you almost the same to move 1 million for me as it does to move 100,000. But we would, I'm almost certain, begin to see it apply in all areas, including banking. Next slide, please. So let's start applying some of those 5 steps. Let's talk about business strategy. I'm sorry to say most of us don't have business strategy that's built on proper information. And we've said digital transformation is built on information and on data. And I picked a very simple example. I went to the NCC website, and if you look at the table on the left, it says that there were 196 mobile active lines in June 2020. And on the right, it shows you internet users, and it says Nigeria, which is 4th from the bottom, has 96 million internet users. Okay, so let's break that down. There are quite a number of young men who have come with brilliant ideas on apps and where the world is going in Nigeria and what they should be doing. And all of them say the same thing, that the penetration of mobile phones, I haven't heard it yesterday, I was on another webinar, that there are 200 million mobile phones in Nigeria, and therefore the penetration is something like 98%. If you go online, you see the same thing, 90-something% phone penetration in Nigeria. If you had to build your business around that, my question would be, what's the business you have and what's the strategy? If my business is selling handsets, it's not 196 million handsets that we have. Why? Some people have dual SIM on their handsets. Some of the SIMs are in devices that are not handsets. So this doesn't tell me anything about the handset. It may give me an idea that it's increasing, but even that you're not sure. But it really doesn't tell me enough if I want to go into the handset maintenance business or what have you. So let's put that aside. So what other business may I want to go into? Oh, I want to start selling services to people. using the GSM, okay? But this is not 196 million people either. This is just 196 lines. The average person has 2 to 3 lines. So you're going to start by dividing this to about 60 million. Immediately, it's a very big difference in numbers, because if Lagos population is 20-something million, you pick Kano, that's almost 20 million. The top 6 cities are already roughly that 60 million people. And the idea that everybody has a phone, so extending again financial inclusion, because there are phone lines for all of them, it doesn't make sense. So we need to figure out where the data is that is relevant to us. We should stop going out, picking data without putting it in the right context. And we do that too often. I've sat down in sessions with banks, and when they finish talking, I've scratched my head as to what exactly are they saying. What they're doing in the US does not necessarily work for us over here. Next slide. And then let's stop listening to all these consultants again. These 3 are clips from online, what people are talking about digital transformation, that are supposed to be the experts. And I'll just read one of them, one at the bottom, which says that digital transformation may refer to the concept of going paperless. See there. But that's the kind of thinking people have. That bring technology in, do away with paper, and we'll say we are doing digital transformation. How does that impact on the customer? How does it impact on the organization? What exactly are we trying to do? How does it fit in with the strategy? It's not it's not what anybody thinks about. And consultants have a limited view. I'm sorry to say, while we talk world class, and I have nothing with world class, you have to localize it, because we have local limitations that would impact the whole notion of world class. So it's a good thing to know what's possible, but you need to come back and be a realist to know what we can do. What is probable is world class. What's possible locally is what we should be focusing on. I'm not saying there's no role for consultants, but we need our people inside to take ownership and drive it. If you ask my colleagues in the central bank, that's one area they are very clear on my views, that there's limited value consultants bring if we ourselves don't understand what it is that we want. Next slide, please. Then we talk about customer. Whatever we're doing for the customer, inside, out, that's normal notion that we have. Rather, it should be outside in. So this is from the KPMG Customer Experience Survey, 2019, the most recent one out. And I took some information from them. On the left, it talks about overall customer experience performance and what they feel about the experience they're getting from banks. Between 2018 and 2019, everything has gone south. For retail, it's dropped. For SMEs, it's dropped. For SMEs, it's been dropping since. Retail, that we've all focused a lot of time and effort on, increased from 2017 to 2018 and has been going down. Wholesale, same thing, down, 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 down all the way. So the question is, with all the investments that we're putting into technology, automation, customer products, it's not translating into an overall experience improvement for them. So a lot of it we're doing for ourselves as bankers. It's not about them. So what are we talking about in transformation if the customer cannot feel it? Now, this is the industry. There may be banks, individual banks, that it's the reverse. Customer experience is going up. But as an industry, what transformation are we doing if it doesn't touch the customer? And what's the benefit of all that spend if we can't see it in customer? Look to the right. How many of them are likely to recommend their bank to other people? Only the dark blue is relevant, because those are the ones that are dedicated to the institution. And for retail, only 33%. Two-thirds of the customers are either ambivalent or not likely to recommend. And that's the highest. You go to SMEs, it is worse. 72% are not interested in recommending their bank. And wholesalers are even worse, 79%. So what exactly are we doing if we can't see the customer being felt in the conversation? It's just a technology game. Next slide, please. Again, to show that we are not really serious at some of the time. So I just picked POS to illustrate. And you see the average failure rate is 13%. So like 1 in 7 times when a customer tries a POS, there's a failure. So depending on what they want to do, chances are every 7 times I try, I'm going to get 1 failure. And if it's too bad, I may just give up. And then we look to the right and it shows you, yes, customers seem to have the bigger problem, but are we helping them to overcome whatever the issue is? Because they're not going to agree that they have the problem. Or there are certain things they are doing that we could have made life easier for them so they wouldn't be doing. But these have been about the same levels since 6 years ago when I started in NIBS. The more interesting one is when you look at bank failures for POS transactions, majority of the failure is in the receiving bank, not in the sending bank. And the question I've always asked, which I've thrown time and time again, is where is the bigger risk? The bigger risk is in sending, because then there's a mandate you may have failed on or an account that may not be funded. I am receiving money from someone who says the transactions are successful. And somehow we seem to have a lot more failure there. So we've moved our emphasis to making it easy for customers to talk to us. That's what all those apps and style, everything is about. Tell us how you want to move your money. Well, we've forgotten the money has to come in. And no matter how good we might be in the customer talking to us, the transaction is not concluded until the person is sending the money to receive the money. But we fail quite badly there. The failure rate on NIP is so much higher with the receiving banks than with the banks that are sending it. So who is the customer? What are we really focusing on? Next slide, please. So let's start talking from a regulator's perspective. Talk about is who standards. I've heard people talk about world standards. I say which world? Third world, first world? Because it's good to talk about world-class standards, but you still need to ground it in world-class infrastructure and everything else that goes world-class. So if that is missing, why are we talking about the standards? Now, standards are a good reference because we need to work towards it. But standards cannot govern you because it means the environment will not allow it to work as planned by the standard, those who define the standards. And so I remember when a few things were done in banking in the early days, people were saying, well, this is how it's done in the US. An example was checks. I remember some consultant working for one of these agencies coming to talk about how we could enhance checks and how in the US, all shops accept checks and there's a standard for handling them. And I looked at him and I said, why? Okay, we have checks, but it's not predominant. Why do you want to make it even more predominant? Why? What's the point? The same guy moved on and said, oh, they have cards. What cards? They were using mark stripes. We are not using mark stripes in Nigeria or in the US, the mark stripes, and then they're able to do this. Say, yeah, but an environment which requires a lot more security, we're not using mark stripe. And they went on and tangent. Now, many things we started doing before them, we've adopted as standards. At that time, we were the ones that were not in sync with what the world was doing. So my question is, do I really care what the world is doing? Or do I care about what will work in an environment that will make things easier and better for the customer? It's not about the technology, it's about the impact on people. So when we ask about all these standards, the tendency is we take those standards, we look at them, and sometimes the central bank comes out with its own version that seems to be a bit different. And then everybody screams and says, that's not how they're doing it elsewhere. We know. It's not as if we're blind. We know. But we've looked at the environment, and many times we've looked at the customer, because the customer is important to us. Next slide, please. The next is, we get so much information and data, but if we don't apply them, then it's really a waste of time. There's the fraud report that's churned out by the Fraud Forum. And I combined information on size of fraud, which is amount lost, and frequency of fraud, which is how many times it was tried. Because I feel, even though you may be losing small amounts of money, but if they find out that it's easy, then they can keep on trying. And then it will pile up. Or maybe it's difficult, but if I can get a large sum, it's well worth my while. And then came up with what we call the relative fraud attractiveness. And when you look at it, the ones that stick out like a sore thumb, ATM, mobile, web, the ones that the non-electronic tend to be mandates between financial institutions. Have they been sharing it? Obviously, they've been getting a lot more slack amongst themselves. Across the counter, we've done very well. ATMs, we haven't paid too much attention. What people talk about is mobile and web. Yeah, with reason. But when you look at the volume of transactions, ATMs have one of the highest after real-time payments. POS fraud is low. What are we doing with this? Many banks don't even bother looking at it. So it's just there. We don't know about fraud. We don't care about fraud. Meanwhile, this is what affects the customer. So we keep on pushing mobile apps. Customers are getting nasty experiences in it, and we're complaining why they're not using it. But we feel the best way to get them to use it is to throw even more money into it. So I was sharing with some people yesterday that I don't do online banking. I don't do it. Those of you that know me are very clear. Banks have given me tokens for free. They've charged me tokens. They've threatened that they won't take my instructions again unless I go online. And I've responded that it's a mutual agreement. If you don't want my money, I'll take it and go elsewhere. But nobody has ever asked me why I don't want to do online banking. Rather, the conversation is always why it is a better thing for me to do. And you know the simple reason? Because there's no value in it as far as I am concerned. The value is all in it for the customer. I mean, for the bank, not for the customer. The normal response is that, yeah, it makes things faster. There's less likelihood of fraud, which is why I brought it up over here. And I say true. But thankfully, with some of the things that are done, we can always identify the fraud issues. But the reason why I'm saying I'm not too keen is because, let's face it, whether I go online and do all the work myself, or I send someone to the bank, or I write a check, you charge me the same. So why do I consume my resources? And at the end of the day, I'm still paying you the same as when I don't consume my resources. Nobody has offered me something that says it'll be cheaper for me when I go online and I don't do physical. And that savings or benefit is material enough to change my habit. So it's not the technology that's the key thing, like we always talk about. So let's take the information that we have, let's use it. So let's quickly, I'm going to round up in the next 5 minutes. I know my time is almost up. Let's go to the next slide, please. So for us, key things, we want to drive efficiency. The customer is at the center of everything that we do as a regulator. And so our consumer protection is important for feedback. In the past, we found out that when customers complained to banks, banks wouldn't do anything and we wouldn't get the information, so we would follow up. So we've created the means for customers to come and submit complaints to us on to the banks. For us, customer is everything. We also have been pushing to get as much information from the banks on almost all their activities. And we're collecting the data. We're doing a lot of data analytics around it, hoping to find better ways to get banks to do what they should do. Next slide. Security. Again, tied back to customers and their thinking. The truth is that we have a lot of standards here that we've created ourselves. Some of them banks have deliberately ignored. If you check the POS and card standard, it actually says that PIN verification should be done not on the card, but by the issuing bank. That's what was written in it originally. However, infrastructure meant the failure rate was pretty high because before you do the PIN authentication and come back, line is not good, it's failed, and then you go on and on. So we do it on the card. When you put your card into a POS, it authenticates the password given against the password stored on the card. And we're hoping to get away with some of the risks attributed to it. But these are the realities that we have. We also have been pushing for 2FA on USSD. If you look at the volume of transactions, USSD is pretty high there. Again, to secure the average customer. We assume that everybody's as learned as us, but the truth is that many customers are not, which is why when you look at some of the instances and incidences that we have, there's a fraud, an ATM, you go and challenge the market woman and she says, no, I didn't give anybody, but I haven't left my shop in the last 2 days. Your card was used. The girl that normally buys or just my shop assistant went to collect money from me. That's nobody. In her mind, it's not a risky person. She gives the person money to go and pay and do a whole range of things. So what's the big deal with the card? Not realizing that having some card details and your PIN is sufficient to put her at risk. So we need to build on securing the customer and in a way that makes sense to the customer and not makes things that much difficult for the customer. Next, we created GSI, which was meant this time for the banks. GSI is supposed to ensure that some of the serial borrowers who would borrow, move somewhere, and then come back again. Going to different banks with different names who have ability to pay or capability, but lack the willingness. What can we do? So we created GSI that allows you to identify where a person may have funds. And more important, it wasn't the technology that was key, but we then created a whole framework around it that allows banks to request and the central bank to legally help them collect money from wherever the person may have it, which means have it in another financial institution. It required us to get all the banks to work together, realizing that while you may not want to release the money, tomorrow you might be on the other side. And we feel it's going to make a big difference, one, in keeping NPLs down, but more important is that it should open up an avenue for better and easier retail banking experiences. So what do I mean by that? If I have GSI, setting up store cards where you have a ShopRite card becomes easier. Setting up credit cards, direct debit mandates, and small credits become easier, because if the person operates Unlike before, where he can move from his account with me, move his salary to somewhere else. I know I have access to his funds wherever they are. Before, a lot of the retail credits were requiring the guy who is employed by one of the approved firms to open an account with us. So does that mean he's moving his salary accounts every time? Cumbersome for him and sometimes limiting, because to move when the institution uses a particular bank is difficult. Meanwhile, another bank may be offering a better service. So GSI should be seen not just from the perspective of helping, to manage NPLs, but that it creates an opportunity to actually grow the retail banking business in a safer way, and then make it easier also for the customer. Next slide. We then have collaboration. That's one of the areas that banks have been at their worst by far. We've always felt as banks that we had a reason to compete on everything, not realizing that sharing information is perhaps one of the biggest strengths. And it was sad in those days where you had fraudsters go to a bank. When they finish with the bank, rather than share their experience, the bank keeps quiet, and then they move on to another bank and they do the same thing. It's the mentality of secondary school, where if I'm in a bind, it's better if everybody else is in a bind. A quick example, I was doing secondary school in some school where it was a federal government college and they were just building it. So of course, no street lights, nothing. And then the halls were very far from the hostels. And when it's raining, you go through paths in a narrow file. And I remember one day we were going and the guy in front of me yelled out, said, oh, he was like the third person in the queue. I was on the line, I was the fourth person on the line. And he yelled out, said, there's water here, it had rained. And so I sidestepped it. The other two in front of him berated him that why would you talk? You think we didn't step into the water? We knew there was water now, but we deliberately kept quiet so everybody else would go through the same experience as us. That's the way banks have been behaving. But we need them to collaborate. USSD has been a very active area, both in frauds and in people using them. But we haven't collaborated in a way that would allow us identify and where they are going from one bank to another, do something about it. We've kept our information to ourselves. We've built the technology as a country that many other people are looking at us and saying, why can't they have the same? Where I can identify the individual, I can identify his accounts, I can do a whole range of things. We're not utilizing them as much as we should. Even standardizing on the USSD, we're not doing it as much as we should. The last point, and usually in my Yoruba man, they said the adult keeps something back from the children, which is the reason why he's an adult or an older person, is that we need to realize that the job of financial institutions is primarily satisfying the customer, but the central bank has extended it to economic development as well. That's my 5 out of 5 perspective. And so many things we ask banks to do is from a development perspective as well. It is strange that in an economy where everybody says there's a recession, business is going down, debts are going up, banks are the only ones that keep on saying it's business as usual. Then there's something unusual. So our role is to be aware of those things and to provide. I have tried as much as possible to stay away from technical bits because I'm sure you're going to have a whole range of people who are going to talk to you about technology, about cybersecurity, about all those iffy things. But they're meaningless if they don't touch the customer. We can't talk about transformation if they don't touch the organization, if it doesn't answer who we are, what we are doing, and also the people. Who are they? How are they in it with us? That's the drive of transformation. The last bit is that no information means no data means no digital transformation. Let's just call it transformation. So let's try and get the building blocks in place for it to make sense. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, sir, for that presentation. Well researched. I guess most of our participants have taken a lot of notes, and we want to see if they have any questions. So, have we got some questions? Okay, we have some of them on the platform. Are we taking them? All right, thank you very much, sir. I think there's not much questions here. We can respond to the questions that they raised at the forum, you know, because we're a bit short for time. Thank you very much once again for the time, and we look forward to having you some other time, sir. And for the participants, the discussion continues at the forum. You can go back, ask your questions. There'll be a lot of debate here and then. And then the next session starts in a few minutes from now. So you are encouraged to log in. Thank you.